And lastly, on a little bit of a lighter note, we have Joe Biden's secret Oval Office TV. So an article here from Politico and other media habits of the 46th president. So when we think of Trump, we immediately think of him being in his Oval Office, watching TV all day long, having fast food delivered to him, and he has a button for a Coke to be delivered to him, Coca-Cola button that he would hit, and someone would come in and bring him a Diet Coke. We know that Trump is very enthralled in how the media depicts him, in what his public image is, what the American people are saying about him. Very, very image self-conscious. We haven't heard much in terms of Joe Biden's habits, really, in his administration so far, whether he watches TV, whether he doesn't. So this is a really interesting article here to me, just based on the fact that we've heard so little about Joe Biden's day in and day out habits in the White House. So we might not ever have a president like Donald Trump, a reality TV star who spends hours in the Oval Office watching TV and reacting in real time to coverage of himself. But while he can't match his predecessor's compulsive appetites, that doesn't mean Joe Biden isn't obsessed with the media in his own way. He's not just an avid media consumer. Yes, there's a TV hidden in the Oval Office. He's also very attuned to how the media portrays him and is likely to get miffed over critical coverage of the media's myopic focus on breaking news over the big picture. He'll call up his favorite writers and columnists, and he pays close attention to the number of people defending him on TV. On this weekend that celebrates the long history of chronicling the most important office in America, we thought we'd find out how the current occupant of the White House consumes the work of those who regard him so relentlessly. Here are 7 things to know about the president's media diet. First off, his morning routine, exercise with a side of Morning Joe. Aides say the president isn't a religious viewer of any particular cable news show, but if there's one he watches with regularity, it's Morning Joe. Unlike Trump, who started tweeting before most of Washington awoke, Biden typically isn't watching the first 6 a.m. hour or rage tweeting about Mika, but he will often tune in while riding his exercise bike around 7 a.m. And we're told he's occasionally in touch with some of the hosts and has at times conveyed positive feedback about what they've said. For instance, he let Joe Scarborough know that he enjoyed his description of Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, as having rocks in his head. There's a tiny TV in the Oval Office. While people step into the Oval Office, they might notice the 5 presidential portraits hung over the fireplace, or the grandeur of the historic Resolute desk, but not the little television. That's the point. The TV monitor sits behind Biden on another desk topped with picture frames, encased in a golden frame itself as to be inconspicuous. But when there aren't press cameras or dignitaries in there, the 10 or 12-inch screen is often turned on and tuned to CNN. While Biden isn't spending hours in his private room glued to a big screen as his predecessor was, several current and former White House officials told me that the president will keep an eye on his secret screen behind his desk and reacts to coverage during less formal meetings with staff. Television outside the Oval and aboard Air Force One are also almost always on CNN during the day, not the Quad, the 4-box available in the building to staffers who want to keep an eye on all of the main cable networks simultaneously. He calls people he sees on TV. Interesting. The way to integrate yourself with Trump was simple. Just say nice things about him on TV. Biden is not as insecure and easily won over as his predecessor, but he has been known at times to pick up the phone to personally thank people articulating helpful messages on television, be they hosts, Al Sharpton has gotten such calls, or panelists. Last summer, as Democrats' big spending package was languishing in Congress, Biden called Jim Messina after seeing him on MSNBC defending the administration's agenda. According to people familiar with these calls, Biden will often solicit feedback or advice from the journalists and politicos he dials up. Interesting. So Biden not only pays attention to the media in a somewhat close manner, but he's willing to reach out to people who he sees as having his back and going to bat for him on TV, which is people that are far and few between, let's be honest here. And this is an interesting little tidbit here, that he will solicit feedback or advice from the journalists that he dials up. So this shows that Biden is willing to listen, and he's willing to try to be better on things that he can be, in order to be portrayed in a more friendly way. That to me is showing somebody that's, wanting to learn and was wanting to be the best that they can in order to appeal in a certain way, right? He's not just calling up people and going, "Oh, you said something bad about me. You're a bad guy now," or you said something good about me and now you're my best friend. No, what Biden's doing here is he's soliciting feedback and advice from the journalists on how he could do certain things better, which I think is really interesting for the most powerful man in the whole world to be asking for advice from people who don't have such power. It just shows, I think, the kind of man that Biden is. And he has his favorites. It's safe to say that Biden isn't up late in the Lincoln bedroom chatting with Sean Hannity after his show. The president's close relationships with members of the media are with his contemporaries, the reporters and commentators he's been reading and interacting with since his years in the Senate. The group includes Times columnist David Brooks and Thomas L. Friedman, both of whom have had audiences with Biden at times, and Mike Barnacle, the Morning Joe regular and longtime columnist. He's also maintained a relationship with the New Yorker's Evan Osnos, who has turned a lengthy interview with Biden during his campaign's early quarantine basement days into a book. He has occasionally talked foreign policy with Friedman, who got to know Biden when he was a senator on a 10-day trip to the Middle East. Earlier this year, Friedman even succeeded in getting Biden to issue him a short statement on a Saturday about pro-democracy demonstrations in Israel, which he used in a column. This is the first time I can recall a U.S. president has ever weighed in on an internal Israeli debate about the very character of the country's democracy, he wrote. Interesting. Biden is willing to go above and beyond to people who he feels like have his back and people who he feels treat him fairly. He's a print guy. Biden has the same push alerts on his cell phone we all do, but he is a traditionalist when it comes to newspapers. When he took office in 2021, he asked aides to make sure the print editions of the New York Times, Washington Post, and then the Wall Street Journal were available to him in the White House residence and the West Wing, according to several administration officials. The papers are delivered very early in the morning to the executive residence staff and the West Wing, the officials said. No one has yet seen him autographing news clippings with a Sharpie and sending them to pals. So, last couple things here. He reads his own clips like everyone in Washington. Every White House compiles daily clips for the president and top aides, but we're told Biden is particularly interested in the local news people across the country are reading. When he flies home after an event, staffers aboard Air Force One print out stories by local outlets that covered his appearances for him to read on the plane. And every day inside the West Wing, the staff secretary office puts together a binder of national and local news clips and front pages, including from Black, Latino, and AAPI-focused outlets. Aides who have spent time around the president also said that he'll often note an article referenced during a cable news segment and ask a staffer to print it out for him. When he was vice president, his clips also included news stories from Delaware, and we're told he still keeps tabs on local happenings. But he doesn't love the coverage. In occasional comments to reporters, Biden has betrayed a frustration with the media's coverage of him writ large, complaining that you guys probably won't cover what cause or topic he's eager to talk about at the moment. In several instances, he has refused to respond to shouted questions on topics unrelated to the event at which he's speaking. Aides, concerned in part about the president's ability to hear shouted questions beneath the whir of Marine One's rotor blades, have tried to limit situations where the president is confronted and perhaps enticed to engage by a horde of shouting reporters. Unlike many of his predecessors, Biden has cultivated few relationships with reporters through off-the-record meetings and conversations. And the one time he has visited the press cabin aboard Air Force One, something Trump did regularly, his off-the-record comments included complaints about his coverage. He has rarely griped publicly about any specific report, but some have gotten under his skin, including a story last summer by the New York Times' Peter Baker about his age becoming an uncomfortable issue. Multiple people around the president confirmed. Understandable. While the president has affirmed the importance of the press independence and its role in a democracy, you'll hear no enemies of the people rants from him. He often grumbles privately that news coverage is too focused on his predecessor and other fleeting controversies, and believes that the media has failed to focus on the historic nature and real-world impact of his legislative accomplishments. He often complains to staffers, especially those who oversee communications, not enough people defend him on cable television, something those plotting his re-election campaign are hoping to remedy with a more robust surrogate operation. It's true. If you watch any mainstream media, there isn't a far left media agenda that's pushing Biden's agenda, as the right loves to claim that there is. It just doesn't freaking exist. There's Fox News, which is an apparatus of the far right, but even the most liberal news station, MSNBC, is often engaged in this sort of both parties mantra, or they're engaged in this sort of idea that we need to give fair and balanced coverage to both sides, no matter how crazy, no matter how outlandish. We need to give them coverage because that's the side that people care about. And MSNBC is the best in terms of fair coverage of Biden. I'm going to sneeze here. Yeah, it's coming. Oh, excuse me. But CNN, for example, they're totally, there's no liberal agenda happening on CNN at any point in time. Does anybody push a liberal agenda on people at CNN? They're centrist at best, and at worst, they're basically they pander to people on the right. They're trying to pander to people who aren't listening to Fox News anymore, for one reason or another. And CNN seems to think that there's some sort of move they can make to appeal to disenfranchised people from the GOP. I would love if there was a leftist media pushing out a leftist agenda to the American people. It just doesn't happen, and I think Joe Biden is right here to point out that, you know, the media coverage of his campaign has been very, very shoddy at best. It is not focused on nearly any of the lasting accomplishments of his administration. It's not focused on the real world impact that Biden being president, the benefits of Biden's presidency that people are experiencing. For example, a child tax credit. You know, you don't hear about how that's making a difference in the poorest people of America's lives, and how it's allowed people to raise families again in some instances. You just don't hear about it. You know, the media is always going to be focused on the shiny object of the week, and next week there's another shiny object. And the way the government works and the way that presidential administrations influence America is often kind of can be a long-term thing, and it's not just now dopamine now. We did this, here's the effect, there's your dopamine. It's not always like that. Things can take years and years to manifest, such as the Affordable Care Act's great benefit that it is having for people now. It took years for it to get running. It didn't start off great. It didn't start off amazing. It started off kind of bad. It started off with a lot of people criticizing it, and the website didn't work. But over time, we've seen how beneficial it's been for the American people. And I really just hope that the media can pay a bit more attention to some of the lasting impact of the Biden administration's legislation that they've passed through.